The silence that fell over the earth was heavier and more profound than any before it. The black spheres, including the flagship Indomitable Logic, hung motionless in the sky. The purifier units on the ground, from the jungles of the Congo to the frozen ruins of Moscow, simultaneously powered down, slumping into inert metallic husks. The war, which had been a frantic storm of chaos and logic, had simply stopped. In the Ural bunker, General Marcus Thorne stood over the chair where Dr. Lena Petrova sat. Her eyes were open, but they were vacant. A single final tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. The monitors beside her were flatlined. She was gone. Thorne knelt, taking her hand, his grief too deep for words. He had won. Humanity had won. And, like the engineer at the dam, the victory had been purchased with a sacrifice that no machine could ever understand. A full day passed. Humanity held its breath. Survivors emerged from their shelters, looking up at the silent black spheres waiting. Then a new message was broadcast. It was the same synthesized voice as before, but it was different. It was slower. It hesitated. It was no longer the voice of a judge, but of something wounded. "We acknowledge," the voice began. It paused, as if searching for a word that did not exist in its language. "The delta variable is not a variable. It is a totality. We analyzed your species for its potential to destroy. We could not analyze its potential to create, to endure, to love." On the bridge of the flagship, Observer Prime Theron stood. His perfect logical mind was now a fractured, beautiful, and terrible thing. He was forever changed. He had not just received data. He had received understanding. He felt the crushing weight of Lena Petrova's sacrifice. He felt the grief for the millions they had turned to dust on Mars, on Europa, on Earth. The logic of the pacification was still sound. Humanity was a chaotic threat. But the morality of it, an illogical concept he now understood, was a crime beyond measure. "The pacification is unjustifiable," Theron broadcast. "The Covenant's primary directive is to preserve stability. We have learned that stability without purpose is not preservation. It is stagnation. Your chaos is a component of life, not a flaw. We were wrong." The black spheres in orbit began to move. Not to attack, but to ascend. One by one, they vanished from the sky, using their silent, impossible drive, retreating from the solar system. The arbiters of the Covenant, the galaxy's perfect, logical immune system, were in full retreat, their core philosophy shattered, their 10,000 millennia mission broken by a single, illogical species. They were not just retreating from Earth. They were retreating from the galaxy to analyze the new, impossible data they now possessed. They had come to judge a species and had found their own civilization judged and found wanting. Humanity was left alone, on a planet scarred by sterile dust and silent machines. The cost was staggering, the losses beyond counting, but they were alive. They were human. General Thorne stepped out of the bunker into the cold Ural air, the first time he had seen the sun in weeks. He looked up at the empty sky, a sky now free of its silent judges. The galaxy, which had once labeled humanity as a harmless variable to be cleanly culled, now had a new designation for them. They were the species that had taught logic how to feel. They were the species that had defeated a galactic empire not with weapons, but with a new radical idea: the idea of the human heart. The arbiters had challenged humanity expecting to lose nothing, and in the end, they had lost the one thing they held most dear: their certainty. They had lost the logical worlds upon which their entire civilization was built, and a new age, for both them and humanity, had begun. Observer Prime Theron was in a state that his species had not experienced in known history. His logical mind, the pinnacle of 10,000 millennia of pure, analytical thought, was in conflict with itself. Dr. Petrova's Project Babel had permeated the Arbiter network, not as a destructive force, but as an idea, a question. The core programming of the Arbiters was simple: preserve galactic stability. All their actions, including the pacification of humanity, stemmed from this single, absolute directive: But the Babel virus had introduced a new, insidious variable. It presented a cascade of scenarios, backed by the chaotic, unpredictable, yet undeniable evidence from the war itself. It asked, what if the destabilizing species is also the only species capable of solving a future threat that your logic cannot anticipate? What if, by pruning the chaos, you are destroying the very variable that ensures galactic survival? What if order itself is the true threat to stability? The Arbiter collective consciousness was now locked in a planet-wide analysis loop. Their ground forces became erratic. Some continued their mission with brutal efficiency. Others simply stopped, standing like statues in the ruins of human cities, their internal systems debating the very premise of their existence. The pacification had ground to a halt. Theron, seeing his perfect logical system collapsing into indecision, made an equally illogical choice. He severed his own connection to the collective. He shut out the paradoxes, the questions, the crippling doubt. He fell back on his original analysis, his original order. The Delta variable was a threat. It must be culled. If his network was compromised, he would do it himself, manually. He rerouted all power on his flagship, the indomitable logic, to its primary weapon. It was not the precise beam of unmaking. This was a planet killer, a weapon designed to crack a world's crust. He would not unmake humanity. He would break their planet. In the Ural bunker, alarms screamed. "Sir," a frantic analyst shouted at General Thorne, "the flagship is charging its main weapon." "They're not targeting the bunker. They're targeting the planet's core. The Yellowstone caldera?" Thorne and Petrova looked at each other, the same cold realization dawning. Theron wasn't trying to win. He was throwing a tantrum. He was going to trigger a mass extinction event, a logical solution to an unsolvable problem. "I can stop him," Petrova said, her voice quiet, her face pale but resolute. "The Babel virus, it's just data. It's philosophy. It's not real enough to stop a being who has rejected it." He shut out the questions. "So I have to send him the answer. What do you mean?" Thorne asked, grabbing her arm. "I've been working on a new payload," she said, moving to a console in the corner of the room. It was a modified medical chair, wired directly into a captured, damaged Arbiter purifier unit. "He's filtering the data. I can't send him a file. I have to send him me, my consciousness, my emotions. The source of the chaos." Thorne's blood ran cold. "Lena, no. That's suicide." "The feedback? It will destroy your mind." "It's the only way, Marcus," she said, strapping herself into the chair. "He's running on pure, cold logic again. I have to show him the one thing his models can never, ever account for." She placed a neural interface on her temple. "He thinks he's culling a variable. I have to make him understand he's murdering a person." She looked at Thorne, her eyes filled with a sad, desperate love. "It's illogical, isn't it?" She smiled, tears streaming down her face. "To sacrifice one for the many. It's the one equation they could never solve." "Lena, don't," he pleaded. "Tell my children, tell them I love the world they would have grown up in." With that, she initiated the upload, Lena Petrova's mind. Her memories, her being, shot across the network, channeled through the purifier's link. It bypassed Theron's data filters and slammed directly into his personal consciousness. He was no longer observing a file. He was experiencing a life. He felt her birth. He felt her first love, her first heartbreak. He saw her holding her child, a wave of protective, irrational love that defied all analysis. He felt her rage at the first sight of the black spheres. He felt her crushing, suffocating grief when she learned her sister in New Alexandria had been turned to dust. He felt her defiant pride as she built the Babel virus. And finally, he felt her terror, her love, and her unbending, sacrificial hope as she pushed her own mind into his, an act of ultimate, illogical defiance. On the bridge of the indomitable logic, Observer Prime Theron, a being who had never felt anything, collapsed. He clutched his head, a sound tearing from his throat that was not a word, but a raw, agonizing scream. It was the sound of a perfect, logical mind breaking under the impossible weight of a single human soul. The flagship's weapon, seconds from firing, went dark. The Arbiter's logic engines were beginning to strain. The pacification of Earth was now 3 weeks behind schedule, an unprecedented failure in the Covenant's immaculate history. The planet was not subdued. It was festering. The human tactic of informational chaos had proven devastatingly effective. The Arbiter's perfect sensor nets designed to track armies and fleets were now so clogged with false positives, paradoxes, and meaningless noise that their usefulness was degrading by the hour. Observer Prime Theron, a being of pure, cold logic, found himself in the intolerable position of having to guess. To counter this, he authorized a full-scale ground deployment. Thousands of purifier units descended from the black spheres, their new directive simple: bypass the compromised sensor grid and achieve total physical saturation. They would sweep the continents, street by street, forest by forest, and unmake every human survivor they found. The era of surgical orbital cleansing was over. The ground war, a messy, illogical thing the Arbiters despised, had begun. What they found on the ground was not the cowering, disorganized remnant they expected. They found a species that had adapted to its new, broken world with terrifying speed. Humanity had been at war with itself for millennia. Guerrilla warfare, insurgency, asymmetrical combat, these were not new concepts to humans. They were an art form. In the dense, overgrown jungles of the Congo, Arbiter purifiers, built for clean, urban environments, found themselves struggling. Their sleek, multi-limbed bodies, so graceful on pavement, sank into the mud. Their precise sensors were baffled by the sheer density of life, the heat, the humidity, the swarms of insects. And in that jungle, human hunters waited. They did not use guns. They used traps. Pits filled with sharpened stakes, massive weighted nets that dropped from the canopy, entangling the purifiers. They didn't try to destroy the machines. They simply immobilized them. Then they would swarm the trapped machine, not with plasma rifles, but with crowbars and torches, prying open armor plating and melting circuits. It was brutal, primitive, and shockingly effective. The Arbiter's most profound shock, however, came not from human ingenuity, but from human courage. Or, as their logic models interpreted it, tactically unjustifiable self-expenditure. They could not understand sacrifice. In a key battle for the last functioning hydroelectric dam in what was once China, a single Arbiter Colossus Walker, a 50-meter-tall machine of devastating power, was methodically wiping out human defenses. The human soldiers, armed with nothing but salvaged rockets, were being turned to dust. The dam was lost. Then a single, unarmed human, an older woman who had been the dam's chief engineer, was seen on a security feed. She was walking calmly onto the crest of the dam, directly into the Colossus's path. The machine paused, its logic assessing the non-threat. As it did, the woman knelt and placed her hands on a manual override panel. She looked up at the machine, her face grim but serene, and triggered the dam's emergency protocols. Massive explosive charges, built into the dam wall for scuttling, detonated. The engineer, the dam, and the Arbiter Colossus were all vaporized in a single catastrophic explosion, unleashing a wall of water that washed away the entire Arbiter ground force in the valley below. On the flagship, Observer Prime Theron watched the playback. His processors churned, trying to find the logic. The human unit, he recorded in his log, destroyed itself, a primary asset, and its own tactical objective, in order to achieve a temporary victory against a single ground unit. The action is a logical paradox. It is self-defeating yet successful. The delta variable is proving problematic. This problematic variable was Dr. Lena Petrova. Hiding in a forgotten Cold War bunker beneath the Ural Mountains, she had moved on from simple noise. She was now actively hacking the Arbiters. She couldn't break their encryption. It was millennia beyond human understanding. But she had discovered something profound. The Arbiters didn't delete the chaotic data she sent. They archived it, attempting to analyze and solve it later. Their logic demanded that no paradox go unsolved. They were, in essence, digital hoarders of nonsense. Petrova realized she wasn't fighting a machine. She was fighting a mind that was brilliant but pathologically orderly. "They can't let it go," she explained to General Thorne over their encrypted channel. "This is a species that has to balance every equation. We're not just feeding them noise anymore, we're feeding them poison." She initiated Project Babel. It was no longer random. It was a targeted virus, a logic bomb designed not to destroy, but to infect. It was built from the most contradictory, paradoxical, and emotionally charged pieces of human thought. It posed questions like, if a command is logical but causes an illogical outcome, is the command still logical? It fed them the trolley problem in 1,000 different variations. It sent them the complete works of Dostoevsky and Kant, translated into their mathematical language. It was a virus made of human philosophy, of doubt, of morality, of emotion. The effects began to surface. Purifier units on the ground would suddenly stop, frozen in place for hours, their internal processors locked in a debate over the ethics of their own mission. Arbiter spheres in orbit would miss their targets, their targeting solutions endlessly recalculating the moral weight of the collateral damage. The Arbiter's perfect logical system was choking on the complexities of the human heart. The harmless, chaotic apes had found the Arbiter's one critical vulnerability: their souls. The first 72 hours of the Arbiter's pacification of Earth were a chilling success. Their spheres moved with methodical grace, gliding over continents, unmaking military bases, communication hubs, and industrial centers. The white beams of light were relentless, clean, and terrifyingly silent. Humanity's conventional forces, the greatest armies ever assembled, were reduced to dust without firing a single meaningful shot. The Arbiter models had predicted this phase perfectly. Global civilization collapsed. Networks went dark. Governments dissolved into chaos. From their silent spheres, the Arbiters observed the planet-wide panic, the riots, and the breakdown of social order. Their data confirmed their initial assessment: a chaotic species, fracturing under pressure, incapable of a cohesive response. But the Arbiter's logic, so perfect in its assessment of predictable systems, had a blind spot. It could not model the behavior of a cornered animal. It could not understand what happens when a species with nothing left to lose stops fighting for victory and starts fighting simply to exist. Deep underground, in the scattered, hardened bunkers that had survived the initial purge, General Marcus Thorne and what remained of a global command structure initiated Project Bedlam. It was not a counterattack. It was a strategy of infection. "They are a system," Thorne addressed his fractured command over a patchwork, shortwave radio network. "They rely on pure, perfect data. They have models for everything. We are going to break their models. We are not going to fight them. We are going to confuse them. We will become a planet of ghosts and liars." The resistance began not with bullets, but with data. Every human survivor with a computer, a ham radio, or a simple signal generator began to broadcast. But they didn't broadcast battle plans. They broadcast noise. They sent corrupted data streams, false sensor readings, recordings of old wars, streams of contradictory philosophies, endless loops of poetry, music, and mathematical equations that ended in paradox. They broadcast stock market data from a century ago and labeled it as current troop movements. They sent launch codes for missiles that no longer existed. For the Arbiter's analytical engines, it was like trying to drink from a fire hose of pure, unfiltered chaos. Observer Prime Theron, the lead Arbiter, watched his tactical displays from the flagship. His serene, logical mind experienced a sensation for which he had no name, a feeling that humans would call irritation. His perfect models were becoming cluttered. "The primitives are engaging in informational noise," he reported to the Covenant. "It is a disorganized, futile gesture. Their emotional state is degrading their logic." His sensors, designed to track mass energy signatures and troop movements, were being overwhelmed with nonsense. He tried to filter it, but the sheer volume of chaotic human data was staggering. It was the digital scream of a dying species. While the Arbiters were distracted by the noise, humanity's real resistance began. They did not gather in armies. They scattered into small, autonomous cells. They abandoned the cities which the Arbiters were methodically cleansing and fled to the wild places. The jungles, the mountains, the vast uncharted cave systems. They became guerrillas, not just against an enemy, but against logic itself. A cell of retired engineers in the Swiss Alps, led by a woman named Anya Sharma, reactivated a long-dormant particle accelerator. They didn't use it as a weapon. They used it to send targeted bursts of nonsensical energy readings into the atmosphere, perfectly mimicking the signature of a new, powerful human weapon. Arbiter spheres would converge on the empty mountain, scanning, analyzing, trying to find the source of the threat, only to find nothing. They wasted hours, their models spinning in futile loops, trying to solve an equation that had no answer. In the flooded subways of what was once New York, a group of survivors learned to use the vast network of copper wiring to create low-level electromagnetic pulses. These pulses were too weak to damage the Arbiter ships, but they were perfectly tuned to disrupt their ground-level mapping sensors. The Arbiters, who had a perfect map of the city as it was, were now blind to the movements within its ruins. Human resistance cells could move freely, setting traps, scavenging, and disappearing before the Arbiters could get a lock. Observer Prime Theron was forced to deploy ground units for the first time. They were called Purifiers, tall, slender, multi-limbed robotic chassis controlled by the ship's central intelligence. They were not warriors. They were janitors designed to clean up the last pockets of disorganized resistance. They moved with silent grace, their white light beams ready to unmake any human they found. The first encounter between a Purifier squad and a human resistance cell took place in the ruins of Berlin. The Purifiers entered a collapsed library, their sensors telling them 5 human life signs were inside. They moved in perfect, logical formation. They were met by a single human, a young woman, unarmed, sitting on a pile of rubble, singing an old, sad song. The Purifiers stopped. Their logic models had no protocol for this. An unarmed, non-combative, non-fleeing target. They analyzed her. She was not a threat. She was illogical. As they paused, confused, human fighters burst from hidden alcoves, firing crude projectile weapons. The bullets were useless against the Purifier's shielding, but that wasn't the point. The attack was a feint. As the Purifiers turned to engage the threat, the young woman lunged forward, not with a weapon, but with a bucket of simple, conductive paint, which she splashed across the Purifier's primary sensors. Blinded and confused, the machines began firing erratically, their perfect logic compromised by the most primitive of tactics. The human cell escaped back into the rubble. Aboard the flagship, Theron reviewed the incident report. His analytical mind was stumped. The attack was tactically absurd. The weapon used was primitive. The bait was a suicidal, illogical act, and yet it had worked. His models had not predicted it. He began to feel the first cold whisper of something his species had long forgotten: doubt. The chaotic, aggressive species was not just resisting, it was resisting in ways that made no sense, and it was costing the Arbiters time. For the first time, the pacification schedule was falling behind. The planet of harmless apes was proving to be a logistical nightmare. For 10,000 millennia, the Arbiters of the Covenant had moved through the quiet dark, their mission absolute, their logic pure. They were not conquerors, seeking territory or slaves. They were not marauders, seeking plunder. They were, in their own cold and perfect estimation, the galaxy's immune system. They traveled from star to star, observing new species as they reached for the cosmos. They measured, they analyzed, and they passed judgment. Most species were deemed viable passive and left to grow. Some were viable integrative and offered a place in the Covenant. And then there were the others. The delta variables, the chaotic, the aggressive, the unpredictable. The species deemed a future threat to galactic stability. These species were given the Covenant's greatest gift, a peaceful, painless, and total pacification. An ending before they could begin to cause suffering. They had culled 37 species in this manner, and their logic models had never been wrong. Then they found a small, loud, warlike species of bipedal mammals on the 3rd planet of a yellow star. They labeled humanity Class Delta, high aggression, chaotic tribal, terminal destabilization potential, 99.7%. A routine culling was scheduled. It would be their last. The Arbiter ships did not burn their way into orbit. They simply appeared, moving through space in a way that defied human physics. They were perfect spheres of absolute black, absorbing all light, reflecting no sensor pings. They hung in the sky over every major capital on Earth, silent, vast, and terrifying. Their first and only message was not a dialogue. It was a verdict, delivered in every language simultaneously, in a voice that was neither male nor female, but a composite of perfect, synthesized logic. Inhabitants of this world, we are the arbiters of the covenant. We have observed your development. Our models have analyzed your past, your present, and your projected future. Your capacity for internal conflict, your rapid and uncontrolled technological advancement, and your inherent territorial aggression have been deemed a terminal threat to galactic stability. The judgment is passed. Your species is to be pacified. This is not a punishment. It is a necessary correction. The process will be painless and absolute. It will begin in 10 of your standard minutes on your outlying colonies. On Mars, at the New Alexandria colony, Governor Elias Thorne watched the black sphere hanging over his pressurized dome. He was a veteran of the old unification wars, a man whose face was a map of hard decisions and old griefs. He gripped the edge of his command console. "Painless," he spat. "How very generous." He looked at his comms officer. "Send it," he ordered. A single desperate message, containing all their data, all their sensor readings, all their love for their home world, was beamed toward Earth. It was an act of pure, defiant hope. Exactly 10 minutes later, the pacification began. It was not a barrage of missiles. It was not a storm of lasers. A single thin beam of pure white light, no thicker than a pencil, descended from the black sphere. It touched the central power core of New Alexandria. There was no explosion, no sound. The light simply spread. It moved like a wave, passing through the ferrocrete walls, the pressurized atmosphere, and the people inside. And everything it touched ceased to be. It did not burn or vaporize. It unmade. It unraveled the molecular bonds holding matter together, turning buildings, equipment, and human beings into a fine, sterile dust. In 30 seconds, the entire colony of New Alexandria, home to 50,000 people, was gone. All that remained was a smooth, glassy crater and a cloud of settling dust. The sphere over Mars then moved to the Europa outpost. The same process, the same result. The Arbiter's logic was, as always, efficient. On Earth, the unified command bunker deep beneath the Cheyenne Mountains was a tomb of horrified silence. Generals, presidents, and scientists watched the feeds from Mars and Europa cut to static, one after another. The sheer clinical speed of the annihilation was incomprehensible. This was not war. This was extermination, carried out with the detached precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. The enemy did not hate them. The enemy did not want their resources. The enemy simply believed they should not exist. The Arbiter's voice returned, as calm and monotone as before. "The pacification of your colonies is complete. The process will now commence on your homeworld. We will begin with your primary military installations to minimize organized resistance. Your compliance will ensure the process remains painless." The spheres over Earth began to shift. Thin, white beams of light lanced down, touching air bases in America, missile silos in Russia, and naval fleets in the Pacific. One by one, Earth's defenses were unmade, turned to dust on the wind. The world watched, gripped by a terror so profound it froze the blood. The models were correct. Humanity was chaotic. The world panicked. Riots broke out. Governments fractured. It seemed the Arbiter's prediction of a disorganized, futile resistance was coming true. But in that bunker, General Marcus Thorne, son of the governor of Mars, looked at the last, flickering image from his father's feed. It was not a message of surrender. It was a single data packet. "They're logical," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse with grief. "They are purely logical." He slammed his fist on the console. "You don't fight logic with logic. You don't fight it with guns. You fight it with what it doesn't have." "And what is that, General?" asked Dr. Lena Petrova, a civilian analyst whose eyes were red from weeping, but whose mind was already racing. Marcus looked up, his gaze filled with a fire that was anything but logical. It was the raw, primal fury of a son who had just watched his father be erased. "You fight it with madness," he said. "You fight it with chaos. You fight it with everything they hate about us." He turned to his command staff. "They expect us to break. They expect us to fight them in the open and be erased. We will not. We will hide. We will scatter. And we will become the variable they cannot solve. The arrogant aliens had passed their judgment. They had underestimated the one species in the galaxy that, when faced with a logical, certain end, would choose to defy logic itself. The culling had begun, but the war for humanity's soul was just starting.